last week there was a change about the Council of Europe. There seemed to have been a complete change of attitude, and it's mainly because of Camp Ashraf. Yeah. And the fact that at long last people had begun to really understand that all of us in Europe, particularly those of us who were part of the coalition in Iraq, have an obligation, like our American colleagues. The situation with the people in Camp Ashraf would never have existed if we hadn't have allowed it to have started in the first place, allowed it to persist, and allow it to go unchallenged in the right way. And that's the crime that we all have to stand guilty of, that we consistently left these people in the situation that we put them in. If ever a group of people were put in harm's way by bureaucracy and mismanagement, then the people in Camp Ashraf are living testament to the mistakes that we made. Sadly, and this is the real issue for me, sadly, so few of the people who were responsible have been prepared to stand up and be counted on this issue. They've talked around the edges about what can and what can't be done, but very few of them have actually had the backbone to actually push this issue with their governments to such an extent that things could change. Now, last week, I tabled a motion in the Council of Europe to the Political Affairs Committee, which is one of the main committees of the Council of Europe. 83 members present, and for the first time, it was unanimously accepted that we would issue a formal statement of condemnation. But this was the first time that the whole of the Council of Europe, represented in that committee, signed up to issue a challenge. And the challenge was to Ban Ki-moon, to Hillary Clinton, to David Cameron, who came to speak in the Assembly last week, spoke with great eloquence about his commitment to human rights and the rule of law.
A quote from you from that Memorandum of Understanding. The MOU is a good start. It outlines the process of relocation to Camp Liberty, which will take place exclusively under the security responsibility of the government of the Republic of Iraq. The government of the Republic of Iraq ensures your safety and security both during the transportation from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty and in Camp Liberty itself until the time comes when you leave Iraq. Safe and secure transfer of the residents of Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty and from Camp Liberty to other countries is ensured. Upon arrival of the residents to Camp Liberty, the United Nations will conduct 24/7, what a terrible phrase that is, but nonetheless, 24/7 monitoring at Camp Liberty until the residents leave Iraq. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a believer in good, old-fashioned trust. And manifestly, by their record in the history of Camp Ashraf, Mr. Maliki and his colleagues are not for trusting. We must continue to remind the United Nations in this cobbled together, completely unsatisfactory arrangement. We must remember that the silence against those humanitarian breaches is simply not good enough. Silence is complicity. Silence is facilitation. Silence is permission. And that is the position of our friends in Ashraf and Liberty today.
As we heard from previous speakers, there was a meeting and a so-called agreement and so on. I'm surprised that that agreement was apparently reached without consultation with the inhabitants of Ashraf. And the agreement involved removal of the inhabitants to another location, and they were willing to go. And we thought, well, at least something will be done peaceably. But it's not like that at all. As we've heard this afternoon from previous speakers, what has happened is that the Iraqi government has exercised its usual appalling attitude and has provided accommodation which is quite unsuitable and quite are not habitable at all. It says the complex lacks elementary necessities. The living units are worn out, having been used for 9 years by the US military and been ransacked since the US departure. The whole complex has just one eating area. The washrooms are situated outside the buildings, quite unsuitable for women. The camps lacks electricity, water supply, and the sewerage system isn't functioning. And this is a camp intended for women. There's limited access to green space. The whole area is much, much too small for the number of people involved. This is not an alternative location. This is a kind of prison camp. They're actually building a wall around it. We cannot have this. This is absolutely outrageous. And what we must do this meeting is to pass a resolution, to go to our government, to say, intervene now, prevent this appalling attitude being displayed to these poor people who are entirely peaceable.
I'm angry and frustrated that as soon as we put behind us a dangerous episode regarding the arbitrary deadline that had been imposed for the 31st of December for the closure of Camp Ashraf, we've been confronted with yet a further dangerous provocation. It seems that Nouri al-Maliki is determined neither to recognise nor to leave intact the rights of the residents of Camp Ashraf. Yes, there was the 24 December Memorandum of Understanding, which some of us would say was at best minimalist and an overall inadequate document. But it does obligate Nouri al-Maliki's government to ensure that the residents of Camp Ashraf should be moved safely to Camp Liberty. Except we now know what Camp Liberty is. Nouri al-Maliki, in a recent interview with the Iranian regime's media, repeated the false accusation of the Iranian mullahs and declared that he has arrest warrants for 126 of the residents. This means that the Iranian regime has simply demanded that he arrest those who are in fact the entire leadership of Ashraf, and he is willing and happy to capitulate and implement this injustice. Depends on the Iranian mullahs to sustain his very dubious presidency in Iraq. Day by day, new signals demonstrate that he does not have the will to stand against the demands of the mullahs who rule Iran. I would contend that all governments who are part of the United Nations have an obligation, and more than any, my government, the United Kingdom's government, has a major obligation. Thank you, ladies.
The Iraqi people were and still consider them guests of honor, and they have all the civil and political rights. But after the Maliki government has received the responsibility of Ashraf camp, they killed many innocent people, from men and women, and imposed economic, political, medical, and media blockade. In addition, yesterday, the Iraqi government has stolen the gas from the Camp Ashraf and left them to suffer. The problem in that the Maliki government follows the orders of the Malali in Iran, al-Mullah regime.
Could I just say how utterly appalled I have been by the stories coming out of Camp Ashraf. The international community has a duty to make sure that the residents of Ashraf, if they have to leave, and like our distinguished previous speaker, I wonder why that has to be, that the international community has got to act to stop the aggression of the Iraqi government. It is unacceptable, and we must keep the pressure up. Let's not forget that a number of them have been brutally murdered by Iraqis under the rule of Iran. And it is the Iranians to whom we turn to say, stop this. Stop it now. And stop the Iraqis moving on the peaceful people in Camp Ashraf. All they want to do is ensure freedom for their people in Iran.
So the question that we will now ask ourselves is what is being done in the face of these transgressions? What is Baroness Ashton doing? Hillary Clinton, Ban Ki-moon and Martin Kobler? Each of them have got to say to Iraq that enough is enough. Iraq must abide by international law, and it must provide the citizens of Camp Ashraf with what they are legally entitled to, and that is their human rights. I want to see Baroness Ashton applying maximum pressure on al-Maliki. It seems incredulous that the EU should be providing resources to a government which is committing human rights abuses. They must ensure that al-Maliki carries through his international obligations. Ban Ki-moon and Martin Kobler must also play their part. They must not just placate an Iraqi government which has committed numerous crimes. We've had enough of the idea that residents need to be interviewed individually in a secondary location in terms of their status. Malaki is actively using that requirement of the UNHCR to create a situation where he can commit further crimes. And finally, as I know time is running short, we've got to turn to the American administration and particularly to Hillary Clinton. The US must immediately remove the PMOI from its list of terrorist organisations. We want to see it lifted now, and we want to see EU countries taking the lead and welcoming the residents of Camp Ashraf in their respective countries. That is our aim today, and we will work on it and will continue to see that it occurs. Thank you, Baroness.
Thank you very much.